We like to think of Fire Emblem characters as each being their own unique units that bring something special and different to the table. However, in a series with 15 different games, soon to be 16 different games, with about 40 new units per game, eventually there starts to be some overlap. This is where the idea of character archetypes comes from. Guy from FE7 and Zyhark from FE9 aren't exactly the same, but they share enough similarities that you can, broadly speaking, describe them with the same 3 or 4 attributes. There are some archetypal characters that seem to come up once per entry. For example, most games have a Jagan, most games have an Est, and the subject of today's video, as I'm sure you can see from the title, almost every traditional Fire Emblem game has what we as a community refer to as Christmas Cavaliers. They tend to both be very strong units who join fairly early on, so you may be wondering why I consider it even a challenge run to solo FE3, not commonly considered to be one of the harder Fire Emblems, with only the Christmas Cavs. Well, if that's the case, then buckle up, because I hope to show you during this playthrough why FE3 Book 1 isn't simply a easier version of FE11, and how it has its own unique challenges that will be especially prevalent as I try to solo the game with the Christmas Cavaliers. Conveniently, we run into the first unique mechanic of Fire Emblem 3 in Chapter 1. This game introduced the dismounting feature that later returned in Thracia 776 and Fire Emblem Three Houses. However, it does it a little bit differently than both of those games. Cavaliers in this game have lances and swords, however they can only use lances while mounted and only use swords while dismounted. This is inconvenient because dismounting comes with a stat penalty, meaning I have to choose between the lighter weapon, swords, or the better stats by remaining mounted. Even though this game doesn't have a weapon triangle, I choose to have Abel charge forward and dismount because he doubles using an iron sword but does not using an iron lance. Iron lances are extremely heavy, so he gets weighed down and is unable to double the pirates, making it harder to kill them and stacking up damage if I don't dismount him. He still takes a lot of damage, so he needs to run back and heal up with a Vulnerary, and then Cain can take his place on the fort in order to tank some more pirates. Forts don't actually offer defense boosts in this game, but they do give a void and passive healing, so it is still advantageous to take that position. It's worth noting that I can't have both Cavaliers charge forward to fight the pirates side by side, because someone needs to stay behind and fight the thief, located in the bottom left, as otherwise he will charge forward and destroy the village on the far left of the map, the one where Riss normally comes from. Riss has been downgraded to a Vulnerary, however, unlike a normal playthrough where a Vulnerary is just worse than a healing staff, in this playthrough a Vulnerary is extremely valuable. I'm not allowing myself to use any staff users, so Cain and Abel's only healing is going to come from Vulneraries and passive fort healing. Sometimes I can't wait around on a fort to heal, so I want to have plenty of Vulneraries before I'm able to shop for them. And it's actually a long time before Vulneraries are available in a shop. Every single Vulnerary use is going to be valuable this playthrough. Other than that, there's not much to talk about. The boss goes down fairly easily, and we move on to Chapter 2. Chapter 2 is a bit more complicated, and I do have a couple of embarrassing deaths, including one where Castor fucking kills Cain. This chapter once again requires me to divide my attention. I have Abel hold the fort on the right, and Cain charges ahead to deal with the Cavaliers on the left. Abel is dismounted so that he can take advantage of a sword, since most of those enemies are one range, although a couple of them have hand axes. Meanwhile, Cain remains mounted for superior movement and javelin access because there are a couple of hunters over to the left. I do move all the force deployed squad down to the south in order to try to keep them out of the action. Ultimately, a couple of them do end up accidentally being meat shields, but there's not much I can do to avoid this, and I don't think it invalidates the solo run. Javelins are extremely heavy, so Cain does not double any of his opponents, whereas Abel does double, but is unable to one-round them, thanks to the decreased stats from dismounting. and also just able sucking in general, red cav supremacy. I'm unable to save the village from the thieves, but it only contains money, so it's not a huge deal. After nearly routing the entire map, my holly jolly cavaliers dismount and double team the boss in order to claim the W. We heroically abandon Lena and Julius, who probably have the situation handled, in order to charge full speed into the den of bandits to the left. Because there are archers and some hand axes, I decide to keep the calves mounted in order to give them javelins, just so that we're making some progress on enemy phase. Also, because I can sell the mend staff for money, I decide to hand it to Julius, have him run away, and abandon Lena to her fate on the fort. I'm sure she'll be fine. Navarre says he doesn't fight women. After taking care of the archers, I dismount in order to fight the axe units, because it turns out I was wrong, there are no hand axes. There's actually not that many hand axes in the early game. My stats still aren't good enough to justify wielding lances and dealing with that incredible weight penalty, but otherwise this is a pretty straightforward chapter. Let's check in on how Lena's doing. Oh, this is awkward. Anyway, we kill the boss in order to avenge the channel mascot and move on to Chapter 4. Let's never speak of this again. Chapter 4 gives us a bunch of decidedly un-Christmas cavaliers. However, we can safely ignore them and only use our red and green duo for the rest of the game. There are several javelin and bow users on this map, so even though they still weigh us down, I decide to equip both calves with javelins, have Kane take on the right squad, Abel take on the left squad, and yada yada yada, easy map. I do grant Mathis's wish to see his sister one last time, although I'm not sure I can say it was before he died. Also, I lied, it's definitely not an easy map. I have to use several vulnerary uses and employ a tactical retreat because Abel, the pathetic green cav that he is, gets overwhelmed on the left-hand side. Thankfully, most of the red units choose to ignore Hardin's squad, probably because they're obsessed with waging a war on Christmas. So I'm able to take advantage of one of the bridges as a choke point in order to wear away at them one at a time. I'm still not able to buy vulneraries, so I want to take advantage of fort healing as much as possible before confronting the boss. Technically he's optional because this contains one of FE3's patented 2-tile-wide siege castles. However, I do want to kill him for the weapon he drops. He gives us a Rider's Bane, and his partner gives us an Armor Slayer, both of which will be incredibly useful. Since when we are dismounted, we have a stat penalty, effective damage against armors might be the only way to defeat strong generals while we are indoors and force dismounted. Speaking of which, let's move on to Chapter 5. Chapter 5 represents the first major roadblock for this playthrough. While some of the early chapters have been kind of difficult, this is the first one that I struggled with and had to do multiple resets for. This is in part because it's our first indoor chapter, meaning that Kane and Abel are dismounted, get a stat penalty, and are stuck using swords. Now, it may be weird that I say stuck using swords as if it's a bad thing, because I have been purposely dismounting in order to use swords instead of lances throughout this playthrough. But in truth, lances are a better weapon once you gain the speed to not be weighed down by them. Swords are lighter, but lances give you access to javelins, which is a 1-2 range weapon. Now, javelin is still pretty heavy, and even with our current stats, we're often not doubling with it. But considering this map features multiple 2-range enemies, being able to counter them on enemy phase would be a huge benefit, even if it meant we weren't doubling. As you'll see, I end up getting overwhelmed by mages and archers, and yeah, my first couple of attempts basically go that way. Oh, and forget about getting any of the treasure. Not only do I have less move because I'm dismounted, I also need to take things extremely slowly in order to bait the melee enemies without getting in range of the archers because I will get overwhelmed otherwise, even if I'm using both cavaliers. Those thieves are long gone with the spoils of war before I can reach the spots where the treasure chests were. As a side note, even if I could reach them, I can't open them, which would mean in order to get any of the treasure, I have to allow a thief to open the treasure chest and then kill that thief for the loot before the thief runs away into archer range. It's just kind of regrettable because These treasures do contain some stat boosters, and FE3 has pretty busted stat boosters. Specifically, the Angelic Robe would be nice, because without stat boosters, neither of my units are going to be capping their HP. Oh well, let's go over how I ended up successfully completing this mission. I start by baiting the Northmost General into suiciding onto Cain with an Armor Slayer. It's worth noting that there's no fort healing on this map, and I have limited vulnerary access, so every point of damage is functionally a bite out of my resources. Next up, there's the 2 soldiers coming from the north. I decide to block the 2-tile wide hallway with both Cain and Namble, but they choose to pick on Cain because he has already been weakened by the General. He gets a level up, but even though he has superior stats to Abel thanks to Red Calf Supremacy, he is still in a good deal of danger, so Abel's going to have to do the next portion of fighting. Due to enemy movement order, if I position Abel exactly on the treasure chest, he isn't able to counter the archers, but he does counter the mage. I gave him the Armor Slayer so that he will one round to the generals as well, but he takes a lot of hits to that enemy phase, and so now he's in danger. Cain is able to kill one archer thanks to Red Calf Supremacy, but Abel is too weakened, and if he goes to kill the other archer, he will be in danger of getting killed by the general. We do not want that. As much as I love my red calves and hate my green calves, I'm going to need both of them if I'm going to complete this playthrough. Thankfully, Cain can clean up next turn while Abel heals, and now it's only the throne room that remains. I carefully dispose of the archers and the last mage, then use an Armor Slayer to kill the boss in what will soon become a recurring pattern. I know it sounds incredibly easy when I just state what I did out loud and play footage of it and fast forward, but this was a pretty taxing chapter, and that's going to be a pattern for the indoor maps. Some of them are fairly easy, but a lot of them are going to be amongst the hardest in the game when I'm using Cavaliers. Thankfully, the next map is an outdoor map because we are running dangerously low on vulnerary uses. A couple have been dropped here and there, but we still haven't run into our first shop, so every point of damage matters. There's forts on this map, so I can take advantage of fort healing, but it's still a concern when I can't just use my turn to heal 10 HP. Fort healing is usually going to be less than 10 HP because it's percentage based, plus I can't guarantee that I survive an enemy phase based on fort healing. Minerva flies away and leaves only a couple of flyers in her wake. Once I kill them, I go south as fast as I can and deal with the Armor Knights, because I know there's going to be a series of reinforcements, mostly Cavaliers but a couple of soldiers, that will be hounding me for the rest of the map. Standing on the forts gives me 2 advantages. First off, I can use the fort healing to my advantage, but more importantly, it does sometimes block reinforcements. My goal is to hold out through all of the reinforcements because I'm not sure that Marth is going to be able to survive running to the Seize Point. Plus, the boss of this chapter is actually pretty tough. It definitely gets dicey at times, but Hiang AI is a very big help as it causes several of the soldiers and Cavaliers to retreat when they could pose a danger to our calves. Overall, it's more tedious than difficult, so let's just move on to the next chapter. Rad and Caesar join this map, but we don't really care about them beyond their utility visiting the shop. Yes, that's right, we finally have access to a shop. Not an armory, we've had armories where we can buy weapons, but a shop where we can buy vulneraries. Thank goodness healing items will no longer be a concern. Foreshadowing. Definitely foreshadowing. This is foreshadowing. I'm telling you, this is foreshadowing. Healing items are going to be a concern later. I buy a shitload of vulneraries, and then send the calves up north to park on a 2-tile wide choke point. Those of you who have played FE11 might remember this as a good map to train Wolf and Sedgar, and I decided that in FE3, it's a good map to train Cade and Abel. I give them javelins, wipe out all of the enemies, and since there's no reinforcements in FE3 for this map, we just charge forward, attack the boss, kill the boss, seize the chapter, and thank God for vulneraries. Chapter 8 is a weird one. It's an outdoor map with a significant indoor section that is technically optional, but there are some treasure chests I want. I decide to ignore my D&D instincts and split the party, sending Cain down south to advance on the map and also potentially kill the thief after he gets the treasure chests, while Abel holds the line up north. I have to dismount in order to go inside and defeat the thief, and I really want to get him before he gets in range of the sniper. The sniper is an extremely annoying enemy, especially when I'm indoors and don't have the ability to counter him. Meanwhile, Abel gets swarmed by flyers, but He is thankfully able to hold on and deal a decent chunk of damage despite Red Cav's superiority. He's still kinda decent. Having taken care of the thief, Cain can now leave the palace and mount in order to fight the cavaliers that are coming from the west. In a traditional playthrough, it is optimal to go through the rest of the castle in order to get access to Maria, and therefore Minerva, who is probably the best unit in the game, plus just an easier way of fighting the Merc, who drops a hero crest. However, we can safely ignore the inside for the simple reason that we wouldn't be able to use Minerva anyway. And we can access the hero crest Merc from another angle without having to deal with the archers and sniper. A theme of this playthrough is avoiding indoor combat whenever possible. Anyway, you probably know the drill by now. We kill the Merc, we kill the boss, we buy whatever we need at the armory, and we seize and end the chapter. GG easy. One thing worth noting is that one of the treasures we got from the thief was a Levin sword, meaning we finally have a way to counterattack on indoor maps. It's still not great because it's a magical weapon, so it doesn't take advantage of our cavalier's strength, but it's better than nothing. Also, in case it's not obvious, I'm giving all of the stat boosters to Cain because of Red Cav's supremacy. That means he gets this pair of speed wings. Bada boom! Alright, chapter 9 time. Having demonstrated he's good at fighting flyers in the previous chapter, I decide to let Abel fight the Pegasus Knights, while Cain charges ahead to fight the mercenaries. Unfortunately, the mercenaries are so intimidated by Red Cav's supremacy that a lot of them don't even bother attacking Cain. FE3 AI is actually better than GBA AI because if an enemy sees that they won't deal any damage to you, they won't attack. I'm really confused why they took this feature out in some of the later games, and I'm glad that they added it back in the more modern entries. It just feels way too easy to have an enemy suicide onto you and deal 0 damage. I don't understand the logic there. Thankfully, the Cavaliers are a little bit stronger than the Mercs, so they definitely attack Cain, leading to their swift demise. After some dude asks me if I want to buy a slave, I sell a bunch of stuff, buy a bunch of vulneries, and then decide to go up north in order to fight a dragon. Let's talk about Mystery of the Emblem Dragons. They have 1-2 range, which means it's hard for me to counter them. I have to use a javelin, which is pretty weak, and their stats are kind of enormous. This means that my best course of action is tanking an attack and taking them on player phase. Unfortunately, this means losing the terrain bonus from the fort, which is something I don't exactly want to do. Dragons don't have the best hit, so adding some extra avoid makes it slightly easier to fight them. I opt to use my newly acquired Levin sword instead of the javelin, so that I can counter the dragon and the sniper who's double teaming me. After I kill the sniper, I decide it's safe to leave the fort and attack with a killing edge. While this won't deal too much more damage, the increased crit rate means that if I get a critical hit, I am probably going to kill the dragon, and that's exactly what ends up happening. The rest of the map is pretty easy. There's a couple of ballisticians, and then I seize the castle. Also, in case you were wondering, the energy drop, of course, goes to Cain because, say it with me now, Red Cav Supremacy. Chapter 10 is another indoor map, which means we are force dismounted. We do have that one Levin sword, but I want to conserve uses because they're not actually buyable at any point, and only one other one will be dropped. Besides, there's several mages on this map, and they have pretty good resistance, so the Levin sword's not going to be that effective against them. The one upside of this map is there's a very large treasure room in the center that both acts as a great choke point for you once the enemies are done killing the useless body bags in the prison cell, and gives you a bunch of, well, treasure. While a couple of them are just sellable, for example the Orion's Bolt, we do get a silver sword, a manual, and a goddess icon. I used the manual before realizing that I actually already had max weapon rank on both Cavs, so it's worthless. I also used the goddess icon on Cain because of Red Cav Supremacy. Luck isn't the best skill in the world, but I still want to give him all the favoritism I can. After killing the boss, there is one more thing left to do on the map. In the bottom right corner, there's a couple of soldiers, one of whom is holding the first Knight Crest in the game. Both of our boys are level 20, so it would be a really hard decision if it weren't for the fact that Red Cav Supremacy once again causes me to give the favoritism to Cain, and now we have a paladin. In addition to the movement boost and stat boost overall, He also gets a really hefty resistance boost. This gets lost when you're dismounted, which is unfortunate, but is still very helpful for fighting mages. Well, fighting mages on outdoor maps, that is. You know what I mean, hopefully. The treasure chest in that room also contains the boots, and I decide that using the Fire Emblem on Marth is different than using the Thieves, mostly as a justification to get the boots because they are +4 movement in this game. It's absurd. I give them to Cain, of course, because of Red Cav supremacy. And, I mean, if I'm being honest, in addition to the joke, it just makes sense to sink stat boosters into one of these. You'd rather have one super unit than 2 mediocre units, especially if you're low manning anyway. All in all, Chapter 10 was actually a lot less painful than our last indoor map. This is not a pattern that will continue, however. Chapter 11 comes in with the ultimate troll because there is a locked bridge over a 1-tile river that requires us to go the long way around through the forests, facing sniper fire, and then Pegasus reinforcements, all because there's no buyable bridge keys yet. It's not difficult, especially since I have Paladin Cain now, but it is annoying, especially since I don't want to send Marth the long way around. He has water walking, so I decide to send Cain all the way on a full loop so that he can kill the various enemies that would get in Marth's way, and then have Marth water walk across so that I can get to the throne. I am required to dismount at the end of the map, however, between the Armor Slayer and the fact that I'm a promoted unit and therefore have stats that dwarf most enemies at this point in the game, it's not too difficult. This map was extremely annoying, but there's not really much to say beyond what I already have. Chapter 12 marks the first, but not the last. Foreshadowing! This is foreshadowing! Time that Garneth is a pain in my ass. The enemies on this map consist of mages and wyverns, both of which can be huge problems in a desert map. I have to kill the first 2 mages because even though I got the resistance boost on Cain from becoming a paladin, I don't have it on Abel, I don't have it on Marth, and also, mages hit on res and that can be frustrating and difficult. I choose then to have Cain charge up north and deal with all of the enemies in the north. Yes, the mages and the wyverns, he's going to fight all of them. Meanwhile, Abel just chills on the fort to deal with a couple of mages coming from the east. Garneth is actually going to decide to retreat before he engages with either of my calves in battle. However, Garneth has served his purpose of annoying me because he's prevented me from charging east to fight the thief. I very much want to kill this thief because the chests contain a talisman, which is probably the most useful stat booster since resistance is one of the few stats I'm probably not going to be capping naturally, and getting extra resistance on Cain, again, Red Cav supremacy, is going to mean that he's even better at dealing with mages, at least while mounted, because then he has access to javelins for physical 1-2 range. I am able to catch the thief on time, however, Abel is in a difficult situation. Oh wow, it kind of sounds weird saying Abel and Abel for different meanings back to back. But yeah, without the paladin resistance boost, Abel is actually in danger from some of those mages potentially cornering him. I didn't have time to just sort of, fight them on the way, so I had to rely on critting them with javelins in order to kill them on enemy phase, so that I could catch the thief before he disappeared into the desert. I wouldn't catch him once he got into the desert because he's not as affected by movement as we are, and if I dismounted, I would lose the mounted movement. Cain, meanwhile, has absolutely no trouble because most of these enemies will not attack him. His stats are phenomenal. We're just picking them off on player phase. Now, you might wonder why I didn't send Cain to the east and Abel up north. It's because Abel actually does get attacked, and he's in even more danger going north. SMH green calves. SMH. One other noteworthy thing here. We have access to another shop, and we can buy pure waters here. I choose to do that because pure waters is a really useful item, especially for indoor maps where I'm going to lose the paladin resistance bonus. I buy more pure waters than I will ever need, then I kill the boss, seize the chapter, yada yada yada. We are just speeding through the mid-game here, although to be fair, the mid-game is usually the easiest point of any solo challenge since you've had the opportunity to snowball, but your enemies haven't caught up to you yet. Even though I'm using 2 units, I think the logic still holds, as there is more than enough experience to go around to both of the bros. Anyway, Abel is going to head south so that we can acquire another Levin sword by killing the hero, and Cain walls a 1-tile-wide choke point where 99% of the enemies cannot deal any damage to him. This map took me 30 minutes using speed up, and there was never any chance of death. I guess that's an exaggeration. There's a couple of flyers in the beginning that can be dangerous if you don't kill them, but yeah, it's pretty easy. I wish I could say that about Chapter 14, however. This is incredibly difficult. It's an indoor map, so we're already at a disadvantage, and I lose the resistance boost that Cain has. There is another dragon I need to fight as well. And the rest of the enemies aren't pushovers either. There's mages and generals, which kind of require different tactics to defeat. Mages you definitely want to player phase to avoid taking magical attacks, because again, we don't get the resistance buff. Cain does have the +4 from a talisman, but that's not going to be enough to cancel out the magical damage, and Abel is dealing with just his base resistance. Meanwhile, the generals you want to attack with an armor slayer, which you can do on enemy phase if you want, but you're gonna be taking a hefty amount of damage beforehand. There's not really a good way to take advantage of our 2-tile-wide choke points as well, since they are diagonal, and most of the enemies have 2 range, so choking them wouldn't really be that good. This is made even more frustrating by the fact that I actually need to kill the thieves, not only because I want access to their treasures, which include another Night Crest, but I literally need to kill a couple of them in order to finish the map, because that's how I get the door key that I need in order to enter the throne room. Yeah, that's right, my shopping has, unfortunately come back to bite me. I didn't buy enough door keys. I used one on the last map, and I used a couple on other maps. I thought I had one left, but apparently I don't. This is entirely my fault, however, I do think it's advantageous to go for the treasure room regardless. There's a number of very valuable things in there, including the Worm Slayer and a Night Crest. The result of this detour, however, is that once we manage to get to the throne room, there are reinforcements showing up. Thankfully, those reinforcements do have to go for a loop around the moat before they can reach us, but it requires Abel to choke a 1-tile-wide choke point. This would potentially be dangerous if it weren't for the fact that the AI is absolutely fucking stupid and ends up one-ranging with an archer, meaning we can basically just tank a single sniper over and over, healing with vulneraries if we need to, while we take our time killing the boss. As for how to deal with the boss, Cain with the Worm Slayer is fairly safe. Like I said, dragons don't have the best accuracy. It is a little bit risky because they deal a fuck ton of damage, but we end up getting the W. I want to emphasize that this is another one similar to Chapter 5 where it sounds a lot easier than it is. I had multiple resets, and I definitely had to rely on some amount of luck, especially in the beginning when I was overwhelmed by mages, the dragon, and the generals. One thing that I'm realizing while recording this commentary is it's actually kind of hard to describe the difficulty of a Fire Emblem solo run in a way that isn't just repetitive, boring, or kind of nondescript. Speaking of boring, this is kind of a breather chapter. Despite being another indoor map, there's not that many enemies and they're pretty weak. There's some snipers that it's pretty easy to kill at one range, and some mercs that can't even really deal that much damage to us. Mages are always a little bit dangerous on indoor maps because we lose the resistance bonus and can't counter them, but thanks to Pure Water, we pretty much got it covered. And even though the boss is a dragon, she goes down to a single Worm Slayer. GG easy. I hope she wasn't anyone important. It's chapter 17 out of 20, and I feel like the enemy stats have finally caught up with our own, because these paladins will 3-round Abel. Now, that may not sound that intimidating, but remember, we are severely outnumbered, and it's pretty difficult to get into a position where fewer than 2 or 3 is going to be able to attack us. There is once again a drawbridge, but I actually purchased bridge keys, so, that's nice. Thankfully, because of Red Cat supremacy, Cain is able to take on all of the paladins at the same time, freeing the way for Abel to destroy the ballistas and Cain to cross the bridge. However, even our mighty red paladin is going to be overwhelmed eventually. There's a couple of generals up there and some paladins, and we are going to get some reinforcements from the rear as well. So, there's the time pressure of making sure that the area is safe for Marth. He's going to cross the river using his water walking, but I still don't want him to get attacked by the generals. As a reminder, enemies who deal 0 damage are not going to attack me, so Cain actually can't bait the generals into suiciding on enemy phase. This is one of the few instances in which Abel is actually better at something than Cain. He can kill the generals on enemy phase because they will be willing to attack him. Cain kills Lawrence, and then I start clearing the area to make way for my confrontation with Camus. Still, because of the amount of time it took to make the area safe for Marth, I'm going to have to hold the choke point for a while in order to make my way over to the castle. I don't really have much choice but to do it with Abel because Camus is one of the hardest bosses in the game, so I want to use Cain to kill him. I just hope that Abel is able to hold out despite Red Cav's supremacy. Again, I got the Abel. It's weird. It feels weird to say. After killing the 2 generals in order to escort Marth over towards the castle, it's time to confront Camus with Cain. Thankfully, I am able to one-round him with the Rider's Bane, which gives me the Gradivus, which is pretty awesome. Unfortunately, I'm only able to use it on outdoor maps, but still, it's nice to have access to one of the holy weapons. Before we seize, I do want to take a moment to appreciate how well Abel choked that point. Good job, buddy. Good job. Chapter 17 is another kind of nothing chapter. While I can't really hold choke points in the beginning because of the flyers and the mountains and all that fun stuff, I can wipe them out pretty easily. A couple of them get through and pose some danger to Marth, but it's nothing I can't clean up with the calves. Then, once I get to the courtyard, a bunch of reinforcements spawn, but here I actually can choke a 2-tile wide point because the walls are not something you can fly over. The only cool thing I want to highlight is that in FE3, Michaelis actually leaves the throne and attacks you with the initial wave of Wyverns and Pegasuses, which is pretty cool. I wish that more bosses in the Arcanea saga would actually leave the thrones and attack you. Okay, so Chapter 18 kind of broke me. You see, I forgot to buy vulneraries. I forgot to buy enough vulneraries. I forgot to buy as many vulneraries as I could get. And I am running very low on vulneraries. Don't worry, I made sure to buy more than one bridge key, even though there's only one bridge after the shop that sells bridge keys. I made sure to buy a bunch of bridge keys, but I didn't buy enough vulneraries. I'm sure glad I have that bridge key, though. The good news is I have more than enough pure water to deal with this mage-filled map. The bad news is FE3 Book 1's only unique map is going to be an absolute nightmare for me. Because neither of Santa's little helpers are able to wield tomes, I actually can't beat Garnef. This means I'm going to have to lure him out of the way if I plan to get Marth to the throne safely. Cain is the only one appropriate for this job because I gave him the boots, and he maintains that +4 movement boost indoors. This means it's Abel's job to clear the left side of the map in order to create a path for Marth to the throne, while Cain clears the right side of the map, as well as the general in the center because he has higher HP than Abel thanks to Red Cav's supremacy, then lures Garnef to the right side of the map, then loops back around, outranging Garnef because of the boots, in order to clear the last few enemies while Abel holds off the mage reinforcements so that Marth can make it to the throne. Because, oh yes, there are mage reinforcements that start on turn 7, putting us on an incredibly tight timer, because unfortunately, I do not have the healing supplies to wait out the reinforcements. I need to rush this map, and if the mage reinforcements come on turn 7 and catch me before I'm able to get Marth to the throne, I will die. This is far and away the most difficult map of the run. We're forced dismounted, the mages hit on resistance, which we do not gain the paladin bonus for. We can't counter them with anything other than the Levin sword, which is going to deal pitiable damage. There's snipers, who we can deal decent damage to with the Levin sword, but are still difficult and we can't counter with our regular physical strong weapons. We are in a rush, which is something that is compounded by my own stupidity in shopping, meaning that we have limited healing items. So, yeah, my only solace is that I know there's a shop next map, so at least I can buy some vulneraries for the final map. This is foreshadowing. This is absolutely foreshadowing. Rather than, as I have been for every chapter up until now, cutting around and just highlighting the big moments, I want to play the entirety of my clear. It's 4x sped up because it took me about 20 minutes to do on my own, and I feel like that is an unreasonable amount of time to devote to a no commentary portion of the playthrough. But I really want to highlight just how frustrating and luck dependent this was, as well as, if I'm being honest and patting myself on the back, a really difficult puzzle to solve that I am proud of figuring out with the limited tools at my disposal. I honestly think that if I had more vulneraries, it would not have been any easier. While theoretically I could have held out against the waves of mage reinforcements by blocking off one of the U-shaped areas and keeping Marth safe, I wouldn't be able to counter because of my limited Levin sword uses. And what happens when I run out of pure water? I can't move and stop choking the point. The mages are going to kill Marth at that point. So I kind of think rushing it was necessary. My lack of vulneraries is frustrating, but, you know, like I said, at least I can purchase them next map because there's a shop next map. Every shop until now has had vulneraries for sale. Why would anything change about this one? Foreshadowing. Also worth noting, during one of my attempts I missed one of the 93s against the boss on the throne, and I was ready to throw my computer out the window. We're in the home stretch now. Chapter 19 would be difficult if it weren't for the fact that next chapter is indoors, so there's no reason to preserve the Gradivis. As such, I'm able to park Cain on a mountain and destroy everything with the 1-2 range holy weapon. I then send Elise to the shop and there's no vulneraries. Fuck. Honestly, this is more of a problem for next map than this one. When Cain is on the mountain, the dragons have roughly 15 hit on him, and he can kill them all with the 1-2 range Gradivis, so no healing required. Abel is going to head north and kill a couple of dragons using the Worm Slayer, but he doesn't need to heal either because he won't see any combat for the rest of the map. I know it was intended to be a pretty difficult map, but honestly this ends up serving as a bit of a breather map for me before the final gauntlet. The final map is an indoor map, which is frustrating because it means we can't use the Gradivis. It also means our movement is reduced, and because of the way the deployment order works, I decided that it's actually within the rules of my solo run to deploy a bunch of people on the naughty list purely so that they can die and make sure Cain and Abel are in the correct deployment order slots. Since they're on the naughty list anyway, I decided to use them as distractions and meat shields in order to keep some of the pressure off of Cain. And I specifically said Cain instead of Cain and Abel there because this is where Red Cav Supremacy is going to reach its ultimate form. Abel is also on the naughty list. Abel is also only here to die. Cain is going to be functionally turning this duo solo into a solo. There simply aren't enough vulneraries to go around to both of them. And honestly, Abel has been very, very helpful. He did choke that bridge after all. But Red Cav Supremacy wins out in the end. Because this map is roughly as difficult as Chapter 18, I'm going to be displaying it in its entirety as well. This is sped up to 4 times, as all the footage has been, but you're gonna get to watch it, and my master plan unfold in all its glory. Another victory for hashtag Red Cav Supremacy. Okay, cut the music because this is where things get a little bit awkward. So, I forgot that one of the things about Medius is that Wormslayers aren't actually effective damage on him. That's my bad. As you'll see though, hitting with the Silver Sword only deals 1 damage, which means even if we get 4 crits, because we do double him, we're dealing 12 damage, which is barely more than throne healing. At this rate, it's going to take astronomical luck to kill him. We could have potentially gotten the Mercurius if we had recruited Minerva, which would have meant then we recruited Est as a result. She just doesn't show up if you don't recruit Minerva. Oopsie daisy. I don't actually know if that would have been enough to avoid us relying on an extreme amount of luck, because we would need a lot of crits and a lot of dodges to be able to do it. I feel like being able to tap Medius on the shoulder is victory enough. We'll just say I infested him with the spirit of Christmas and he decided not to be evil anymore. So, hooray! Victory achieved, I guess? I don't know. I kind of like it when the answer to the questions in the videos is actually no. So that's where I'm going to leave it. If you want to one-up me, you can record your own Christmas Cavalier solo run of FE3 and show me that actually I'm a complete scrub and it is possible to beat Medius with only Cain and Abel. Cain is at max stats, by the way. Even better level ups or better stat boosters or anything wouldn't have made this more possible. But go ahead, maybe extra weapons or, I don't know, buying vulneries, which I didn't do, would make it possible. Somehow I think this is actually an impossible challenge, but I am open to being proven wrong, and I will pin a link in a pinned comment if you manage to do so.